Hello, folks. Kirby Obsidian here. I want to talk economic policy and get into some numbers in a way I usually don't. I'm not generally strong on stats, but sometimes numbers and figures sometimes they tell you an awful lot. And in this case, I think they say an awful lot about um, the ways of MAGA and why it is damaging and why I make the noise that I make. So, we've had two kind of key um, uh, policies that have been debated over the last year at least. Trump came into office promising to extend the tax cuts that he made in his first term and that were due to expire. And he managed to pass those, he managed to do that so that tax cuts, and this is for all classes of people, okay? And it's estimated, by the way, that the tax cut for the lowest income earners comes to like about $300 a year. Nice. Tax cuts for people earning over $1 million is something like $90,000 a year. What the government, what the federal government will not be taking in as a result of those tax cuts is between 100 and 120 billion dollars. Okay, that's what will not be available for other spending. Okay, the other issue, healthcare and healthcare premiums. As most of us know, that's a big issue in the U.S. The U.S. has probably the worst healthcare of any of the developed countries. We pay more for healthcare per capita, but we get less. And that's another structural issue that has to do with the privileges of profit making corporations here as opposed to in Europe. Um, so that a lot of Americans don't have health care or health care is way too expensive. So there was Obamacare, and then Biden added some subsidies to help people pay for their health insurance. And that's about to expire in a couple of weeks. Now, to keep those subsidies going would cost between 20 and 30 billion dollars a year. Okay? So, tax cuts 100 to 120 billion a year, money we won't get. Healthcare subsidies 20 to 30 billion a year, which we will or will not spend. Now, some of the argument coming from the right is, first of all, maybe the most fundamental is, well, if rich people, if they earn that money, they deserve to keep that money. Why should the government have it? Okay, that's a point. But another point is the money that comes in via those taxes pays for a lot of things that benefit all of us. And many would argue legitimately that those things benefit the well off more than it benefits others. So, infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, and all that. If you are low income and can't even afford a car and don't get to fly off to on vacation, you're paying what taxes you pay for things you can't benefit from. You're not benefiting from those roads, not in the same way. Now, sure, some of that money goes toward the transit systems as well, which the wealthy don't tend to use. Um, they're using the airports, and anyway, I think it's reasonable to say that the well-off benefit more from general quality and level of infrastructure than do those kind of barely scraping by. I think this is kind of obviously the case with the quality of policing, the quality of like ambulance and fire services, the quality of schools. All of those things tend to be much better in wealthy communities than in not so wealthy communities. In the case of education, a lot of our education is paid for directly by property taxes. So yeah, even if the property tax rate is the same, you're going to find that the schools are going to be much better in places where people have high income than in places where they have low income. But that's not a progressive tax. That's a totally different tax situation. But other ways that the wealthy benefit is that, first of all, you have a climate conducive to having businesses. You go to a lot of third world countries, developing nations, even if you have a great idea for a business, actually establishing it might be more of a challenge if there's no policing, if there's no educational services to provide a quality workforce, even having the roads and so forth to get people to and from your business. So there are a lot of those kind of secondary and tertiary benefits that the well-off get from paying those taxes. And part of the thing that I guess you would want if you need a workforce is you would want that workforce to be healthy. So I think it's kind of clear that there is a social benefit to taxes that support the society overall. But another window kind of through which to look at all this, it used to be that our taxes were way different than they are now. In the 1950s, the upper rate for the highest income earners was over 90%. In the 60s, it came down under the Kennedy and Johnson tax reforms. The top rate was lowered to 70%. And that held through the 70s. Now, Reagan came in, and one of Reagan's big things was trickle-down economics. Reagan argued that if you cut the tax rates on the top, the upper echelon and corporations, well, they're going to be able to generate more business activity, more income, more profit, and that will trickle down to the middle classes and the lower classes, and that everyone will benefit. It was a hotly debated argument. Reagan won, and Reagan then lowered the upper tax rate from 70% to 50%, and then down to 28%. The trickle-down thing didn't work though, because any statistic you want to look at will show you that from the time of the 1980s, the wealthiest Americans have benefited tremendously. Their incomes have just soared, so that we now have the billionaire class. We now have a whole segment of the super wealthy, while working class people, they've barely stayed level. And as a matter of fact, it's gone backwards for working class people. And I vividly remember, and this is something I talk a lot to people about when I talk politics. When I was in university, well, okay, when I was 20 years old, I dropped out of university. I didn't go back and get a degree until I was in my 30s. But all through my 20s, which is in the 70s and the 80s, I never had a problem just taking care of myself because just about anyone could get a job, any kind of job, anywhere, and it would be enough for you to afford an apartment, for you to feed yourself, pay your utilities, buy clothes, and have money left over to have a good time, to go to date, to go to games. You could live a life. These days, young people simply can't do that anymore. People with degrees and with technical skills and with full-time jobs are often living in their parents' basements. They can't afford an apartment, let alone to buy a house. Back when I was in my 20s, lots of single income families, a single income earner, spouse, 2 or 3 kids, no problem at all. These days, you kidding? It just hardly exists anymore. So that's what's happened since Reaganomics in the 1980s lowered those tax rates so dramatically to 28%. Now, in the 90s, Clinton raised the top rate back up to almost 40%. Bush came in, cut him back down to about 35%. Obama put him back up to near 40% again, and now Trump has lowered them again. Plutarch, the ancient historian, wrote or said that wealth disparity was one of the most destabilizing forces in a society. How long are we going to survive in this world where at the same time we have the super wealthy billionaire class, people who own islands and private jets and all that, and at the same time we have veterans living on the street? It's not very sustainable, and it's certainly not conducive to a comfortable, well-ordered society where people can raise families and have businesses that do well over a sustained period of time. It's very destabilizing. So, to me, when I look at this matter of let's give up the $100 billion a year for these wealthy people to keep a little bit more of their money, as opposed to spending $20 to $30 billion to keep a lot of families healthy. It's no contest to me. It's no, now of course, okay, I'm not in the billionaire class, so what's it to me? The tax rate has never really mattered much to me because I've always been aware of the services. And yes, they're sometimes inefficient and all that. I get that. That's an argument and a concern. But to me, there's no question that it's way more important to keep these health subsidies going than it is to help rich people be richer. Folks, feedback is welcome. I love your comments. Keep them coming. Bye for now.